It's been over 60 years since the passing of actress Marilyn Monroe at the early age of 36. Yet so vast was her fame and so indelible her image that we still recognize her, and her estate continues to earn millions of dollars every year from royalties. Sadly, Marilyn is also remembered for her mysterious death in August of 1962. We were told that she accidentally overdosed on a fatal combination of prescription drugs. We were also told that she took her own life using those same drugs. But after some suspicious activities by law enforcement, word had it that Marilyn was a victim of murder. Those were the days just prior to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, when the concept of conspiracy theory was born. But I think it was Marilyn's suspicious death that really ushered in this era of distrust of the mass media. Was Marilyn's death also the result of a conspiracy, one that would silence her and prevent the embarrassment of heads of state? Marilyn and JFK had had an affair, and ironically, both of their deaths ended up shrouded in conspiracy theories, but of course for very different reasons. What can forensic astrology tell us about Marilyn and the tragic events that befell her on the night of August 4th, 1962? First, we'll take a look at her birth horoscope. I'm releasing this video in honor of her birthday, June 1st, 1926, at 9:30 a.m. in Los Angeles, California. Marilyn was a sparkling sun in Gemini, with sun ruler Mercury well dignified in that sign. These planets are circled in blue in the 10th house, and the sun is in the Capricorn degree. She was a highly ambitious and intelligent person, and although she gave the classic impression of the dumb blonde, it was all an act. She was bright, witty, well spoken, and very articulate. Gemini is represented in the tarot as card number 6, the Lovers, showing the merging of two individuals in love or agreement. And Gemini is symbolic of Marilyn's mercurial nature. Since childhood, she knew she wanted to become someone special and constantly visualized herself as a famous person. She spoke of how she developed a super alter ego that she eventually manifested in real life, someone that she transformed herself into. She successfully merged her past personality into that of a future star. Marilyn had many lovers and admirers, as the Lover's card may suggest. And she also coined the humorous statement, if you're going to be two-faced, at least make sure one of them's pretty. Nothing could be more Gemini than that. Marilyn's Venus in late aggressive Aries shows that she knew what she wanted, and she went after it with no apologies. Venus is in mutual reception with Mars in Pisces, shown by the dark purple line joining them in the chart, as the planets are dignified in each other's signs. To this end, she could be very seductive and sensual, but Mars in Pisces also forewarns of possible addictive or obsessive behavior, and Venus in Aries shows discord with partners. Both of these qualities were expressed in her life. She had 3 unhappy marriages that caused her great pain, and she developed a serious drug and drinking habit. She had, in fact, overdosed on prescription drugs a few times, which made it easy for many to believe that she had caused her own death, either deliberately or by accident. Marilyn's ascendant or rising sign was bold, dramatic Leo, the home sign for many in the entertainment business. Her thick, flowing golden hair was emblematic of the Leo persona. Neptune rising in Leo gave her the allure and glamour of the movie stars of the 1950s. And it was Marilyn who set the trend for going bleach blonde, as her natural hair color was actually a light brown. With Neptune rising, she became glamour personified, and she embodied the fantasy fairy tale of many admirers, male and female alike. She was a natural for the silver screen. Her Aquarius moon opposed Neptune, projecting an illusion of herself, but also showing a tendency toward addiction and self deception, also deception through others. This opposition received a hard square from Saturn, forming a very destructive T square in fixed signs. These aspects are marked in red in the chart. The Moon Saturn square suggested her many bouts with depression and emotional low points, which were well documented by a ravenous media who followed her every step. Moon Saturn also describes maternal problems. Marilyn was born of an affair between her mother, Gladys Baker, a film cutter at a movie studio, and an unknown man later identified through DNA as Charles Stanley Gifford, Gladys's work supervisor. Gladys had mental health issues and suffered a mental breakdown which confined her to a sanitarium. This sent young Marilyn into foster care, where she endured molestation and sexual abuse. The aspects describe a very unfavorable family situation that left deep marks on Marilyn's psyche, but that also led her to create and manifest a completely different lifestyle for herself. As a young woman, she had attempted to contact her father, but when she finally was able to reach him by telephone, he hung up on her. This painful rejection stayed with her for the remainder of her lifetime. Jupiter in late Aquarius also jumps into the fray of the T square by magnifying these difficult situations. Marilyn had her moon widely conjoined to Jupiter, and she was a humanitarian at heart. In spite of her emotional sorrows, she had a keen sense of humor and did her best to keep an optimistic outlook on life. The Saturn retrograde in Scorpio is a sad testament to the lack of a father figure. In my series on the Black Dahlia, I talked a lot about the negative effects of the lack of a father figure for the Leo native. And as Marilyn had Leo rising, the same applies here. Saturn afflicted in Scorpio also speaks of physical abuse, and Marilyn had been molested and abused as a child in foster homes. The abuse by older men, combined with the abandonment by an uncaring father, gave way to extreme emotional vulnerability and depression, a feature of Marilyn's behavior that was evident to many during the final years of her life. The green line on the chart shows Mars in trine to Saturn. The childhood experience of physical and sexual abuse probably showed her just how to use her sexuality and powers of seduction, but she could never quite escape the sense of being victimized by men, and she endured one unhappy love affair after the other. Shown in the square in gray, Marilyn had Black Moon Lilith rising on her Leo ascendant. Lilith is often associated with the dark side of nature and the use of power, sometimes for evil. She had an innate sense of the power of manifestation or magic, as she had transformed her own persona into the superstar that she had envisioned as a young girl. She was rumored to have had an affair with the founder of the Church of Satan, occultist Anton LaVey, as she harbored an intense interest in the occult arts and practices. But Lilith rising may have also brought her into contact with less desirable entities, and she faced many internal demons. Marilyn's asteroids prove prophetic. Many thousands of asteroids were simply named after people, but their appearance in a horoscope is often quite meaningful. It's interesting to note that Marilyn, who was born Norma Jean Baker, has the asteroid Marilyn exactly conjunct her Gemini sun, in effect giving her two names, just as she had two distinctly different persona. The sun formed a tense opposition to the astral body Mors Somnus, whose literal meaning is death, sleep. Marilyn had an addiction to all manner of depressants, including sleeping pills and tranquilizers, and her death was attributed to an overdose of these drugs. She was therefore quite familiar with the state of death sleep until it finally came to claim her at the end. The Leo ascendant forms trines with asteroids Alcmene and Antiope, which is revealing as they both concerned victim blaming, seduction, abuse, and losing control of one's circumstances, as Marilyn did in her final days. Her Aries Venus formed a tense square to asteroid Cassandra, which was named after a Greek prophetess. Cassandra's prophecies were often very accurate. No one ever listened to her. Although very in tune with her intuitive side, Marilyn fell prey to being considered just another dumb blonde whom people often didn't take seriously. In an eerie way, Cassandra grew weary of being ignored and eventually took her own life out of desperation, a fate which has often been assigned to Marilyn. As for other names, asteroid Ralph exactly trines Marilyn's Aquarian moon. She was strongly enamored of her psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, whom she relied on heavily, and who provided her with prescription drugs. Another name that surfaces via asteroid is Kennedy. She had affairs with both Kennedy brothers while JFK was in office as president, and Bobby Kennedy was his attorney general. But here, Kennedy forms a harsh square to her Saturn, showing a karmic connection and one that, in my view, led directly to her death. Since you've watched the video this far, you might be interested in my work on asteroids or cosmic influencers, which is available through all major online retailers. It's a directory of over 400 asteroids, and it explains how they are found in the person's horoscope and how they are interpreted, in addition to the backstory of the myths after which many of them were named. Now, back to the video. In addition to Cassandra, Venus also forms a harsh square to the asteroid Aphidas, and this too is a very eerie reference. Aphidas was a Greek centaur who was supposed to go into battle as the centaurs did as warriors. But instead, Aphidas got very drunk and fell asleep. While blissfully unconscious, he was shot by a spear and died. The asteroid warns of careless behavior due to the use of consciousness altering substances and of being taken off guard. The spear gives me chills because I believe that Marilyn's demise was caused by a fatal injection of the powerful drug chloral hydrate. So now let's look at the crime horoscope to see just what did happen to Marilyn on her last night. The crime chart was cast for the moment that Dr. Greenson, who had been called to the house by Marilyn's housekeeper, called for police and an ambulance. It was 4:35 a.m. on August 5th, 1962. Why the housekeeper herself did not call police first is puzzling, along with many other aspects of this unusual case. Noticeable in the crime chart is the appearance of twin fixed stars, Castor and Pollux, which straddle the 22-degree Cancer ascendant, shown by the two red stars in the chart. They describe the situation with chilling accuracy. And it's also strange to note that JFK's midheaven is at 23 degrees of Cancer, sliding right into this ascendant along with the fixed stars. The stars are mythical twin brothers, Castor and Pollux. One was a rough type and one was very genteel, kind of like the way the Kennedy brothers were. John F. was very kind and personable, while Bobby was more considered his bulldog and his fixer. The ascendant, representing Marilyn, is squeezed between these two brothers, just as Marilyn found herself caught between the Kennedys. Marilyn had had an affair first with JFK and then his brother Bobby, and at the time of her death, Bobby had broken up with her. But she had persisted, calling the White House constantly demanding to speak to either of them, but they consistently ghosted her. Her persistence was beginning to cause worry, as Marilyn may have been privy to certain secrets revealed through pillow talk. She also kept a red diary of her affairs, which has never been found. In addition, a search of her home revealed the presence of tape recording equipment in the attic above her bedroom. Someone had access to some very private conversations and some very personal bedroom activities, and these tapes were never found either. It's possible that her romantic trysts with Bobby were recorded on these tapes, so their contents would have been catastrophic for the White House. In addition, records of her telephone calls obtained by the police were lost, adding another red flag to the mix. By the time of her death, both Kennedy brothers were anxious to rid themselves of her constant demands. The fixed stars tell us that these men were involved, even if indirectly, in her death. In fact, Bobby Kennedy was seen by witnesses at her home on the death night. Also in the crime chart, by transit, the sun is crossing Marilyn's natal ascendant at 13 Leo, an unfortunate degree. This could actually indicate a visit from royalty. Other unfavorable numbers are the 22 degrees of the crime chart being a degree of kill or be killed. Marilyn's birth year of 1926 or 26 adds up to 8, as well as her death year, 1962, the reverse of 26, and also adding up to 8. And she died in the 8th month of August, when the moon's nodes and Pluto were both at 8 degrees. 8 degrees is the degree of Scorpio, the sign of death and murder. It houses her karmic natal Saturn. The perpetrators are shown by the Capricorn 7th house, where Saturn, its ruler, conjoins the moon's south node or Ketu. Saturn also rules the 8th house of death. Saturn rules an older person and is well placed in Aquarius as its ruler. And Aquarius rules psychotherapy. Dr. Greenson was Marilyn's psychiatrist. The South Node will show evidence involved in the crime, and its proximity to Saturn suggests that the perpetrator took possession of or got rid of evidence, possibly in the form of tape recordings, or maybe the diary or medical records. The diary would be ruled by Mercury, which is in the first house and therefore was in Marilyn's possession. With Mercury ruling the 3rd and 12th houses, the diary was kept hidden, requiring a ransacking of her house, which had taken place. The 12th house also rules scandal, which the diary would surely have created. Now checking the asteroids of the crime chart, we see that the 18-degree Gemini Mars squares asteroid Kennedy. Just as in Marilyn's birth chart, the Kennedys promise a bad situation for her. And strangely again, asteroid Marilyn conjoins the ascendant of the death chart. In the crime chart, The asteroids continue to paint a picture of Marilyn's last night on Earth. Mercury is conjunct Bacchus, which represents intoxication, drinking, or drugs, and Venus is conjunct Panacea, pretty much the same thing. A panacea is something we take to help us feel better, so drugs are all over the crime chart. And Black Moon Lilith here is conjunct the asteroid Ralph, as well as in opposition to asteroid Robert, as in Bobby Kennedy. One creative use of asteroids also came into play here. I wanted to try and find some reference to the diary to see how well it was emphasized in this chart. I believe Mercury already does a good job of that. And there's no specific asteroid for diary, but it's funny, I did find an asteroid, Anne Frank. Anne Frank was a Jewish girl who died in the Holocaust during World War II and became famous because she left a diary behind of her experiences during the war. That book is world famous, known as The Diary of Anne Frank. And isn't it interesting that asteroid Anne Frank in this chart squares Mercury, which happens to rule diaries? Oddly, asteroids Norma and Baker are together in Libra on the fourth house cusp of endings, signifying the end of the woman born Norma Jean Baker. Saturn forms a harsh square to Neptune, suggesting the use of drugs, and Jupiter trines Neptune, suggesting a lot of drugs. In fact, Marilyn's autopsy showed an enormous amount of chloral hydrate in her system, which had to be either injected or dosed via enema. Why? She could not have possibly swallowed that much of the drug, as it would have rendered her unconscious or outright killed her before she could even ingest that much. The moon, representing Marilyn, is in trine to Saturn, showing a relationship between her and her killer. Moon in Libra receives Saturn by exaltation, and she thought very highly of Dr. Greenson. But Moon is also conjoined to Black Moon Lilith, and evil was enacted upon Marilyn on this night. Lilith accompanied her from birth, on her ascendant in her birth chart, and finally in her death chart as well. The president of the country would be seen by the 10th house, which is Aries, ruled by Mars, which also rules the 5th house of love affairs. Interesting that here Mars is in Gemini, the sun sign of both Marilyn and JFK. Doctors are also shown by the 6th house as they relate to health and healing. The 6th house ruler, Jupiter, is in the 8th house of death and conjoins Chiron, planet asteroid of healing. I believe this again points a finger at her doctor as prime mover in her death, at the behest of the Kennedys. Jupiter trines Neptune, ruling the drugs which were administered by Dr. Greenson. Was Greenson acting only on the request of the Kennedys? I've read that Marilyn was also having an affair with Dr. Greenson, a well-respected professional and married man with children. Knowledge of this unethical behavior could certainly have been damaging to his career and family. The planet Uranus at 29 Leo is shown underlined in black and conjoins the majestic fixed star Regulus. Regulus is the star that rules royalty, like kings, queens, and presidents, and both Uranus and Saturn co-rule the 8th house of murder and death, again connecting JFK to the motive behind the murder. Last but not least, I haven't mentioned Marilyn's housekeeper, Eunice Mary, who played a pivotal role in promoting the notion that Marilyn's death was accidental. The asteroid Mary conjoins the malefic fixed star Algol and speaks volumes here. Mrs. Murray did a number of strange things that evening that were never challenged. When the police showed up after 4:30 a.m., she was in the process of laundering Marilyn's bed sheets. Why do laundry in the middle of the night unless there's something to cover up? This was spoliation of evidence and shows that someone moved Marilyn's body after death and stripped down the bed where she was found lying face down. Another thing to note about Mrs. Murray is that servants are shown by the sixth house, which here is ruled by Sagittarius. And we see that Jupiter is in Pisces next to Chiron, showing a caretaker, someone who looked after things as she did with Marilyn's affairs. Jupiter is in trine to Neptune, so she was possibly deceiving people through fear or coercion by others. Marilyn's body also had many bruises that were not consistent with lividity from lying face down and were signs of a possible struggle, as if maybe resisting an injection. Mrs. Murray also claimed that she saw the light on in Marilyn's room late that night, even though it wasn't possible to see light from under the door, which Marilyn always kept closed and locked. The base of the door came flush to the carpet. There was no space from which to see a light in the room. Mrs. Murray had also called some of her relatives to come over very late that night, obviously in a state of fear and anxiety. I believe the poor woman was threatened by the doctor or the Kennedys, specifically Bobby, and the powers that be, and traumatized by Marilyn's death enough to keep her mouth shut. The algol placement may have been a serious threat to keep her quiet, as algol often references violence, losing one's head, literally or otherwise, and violence to the throat, as in keeping someone from speaking. Finally, there's an interesting Arabic part that confirms these suspicious astral aspects. The seventh house cusp, 22 Capricorn, hosts the Arabic part of poisoned things. Marilyn was given an extreme dose of drugs which caused her death. Given her emotionally unstable background, drinking habit, and addiction to prescription drugs, it was easy for everyone to pass this off as an accidental overdose or a taking of one's own life. But forensic astrology tells us much differently. I'm going to close with a quip that Marilyn made just weeks before her death concerning her firing by Fox Studios from the film Something's Got to Give. As stars, all we demanded was our right to twinkle. I think the stars have set us right on what really happened to Marilyn. May she rest in peace. I am B.D. Salerno, and thank you for watching.